So let's go and take an example, right? Try actually doing it by example, by looking at this thing right here, right? And it says basically point of sale support system developed to support store operations, and software shall do, the following things. Now, of course, you can see that this format chosen for this specific business requirement document right now, this POS subsystem software, of course, is written with an idea in mind to be as much clear as possible for us to be able to identify the actors, the use cases, the scenarios, the precondition, post-conditions, objects, database records. Oftentimes, this requirement could have, portions of information which could be completely irrelevant. The business, experts are trying to explain some concepts which may be outside of the boundary of the system that we need to implement. So of course you need to be alert to and obviously, when you're going through these interviews, you need to ask them, is this what you want the system to do, or is it just for our information? What do we need to really understand? So again, this is just essentially really watered down, basically the skeleton, the ideal, if you want, a set of business requirements, which is almost can be taken almost with every single sentence of it can be taken to the level of a functional spec. But let's give it a try. So let's just say, so what does this say? All right. Keep track of the amount of sales at each register for each log-on, log-off cycle. Okay. All right. So very good. Then let's perhaps what we can do is we can use some kind of scratch pad application right here. Let me resize this so it's more or less manageable. Okay, right here, and we can say then we would like to be able to remember who are the actors, or basically the users of the system, what objects, what database entities. When I talk about persistence tier, typically the structure of databases are described with something called ERD, Entity Relational Database, for relational databases, and from that realm, all the records in the database we can refer to as persistent entities, or simply entities for short. So remember, entities are those things that are stored in the database. Essentially, entity equates, right? It's the same as the database record, okay? So if I have a table in the database that describes cashiers with their names, their IDs, their hours of operation, and whatever else information we decide to store for the record for each cashier would be an example of an entity in a database. One record, right? So basically, typically you have a table of records, but the entity is just one instance of it, right? Or say a sale with the number of items, or for example, you can have another entity. An example of it would be a sale item with the current price, right? And perhaps the product code and things like that. All right. So actors, objects, database entities, and perhaps also use cases. So use cases, sometimes I want to contribute to the list of my use cases simply by recognizing, the user has to log in. Well, very likely that login screen very well represents the front of a specific use case in the system, and should be handled by a separate set of objects or procedures, and that's a recognizable use case of the system. just basically an instance of someone using the system. So these are four major parts that I want to be able to pay attention to. So keep track of the amount of sales. Now, sale is complicated because someone has to originate the sale, right? Someone has to keep track of items that belong to the sale. Someone has to compute the totals, and so forth and so forth. So most likely I am thinking that sale is an object, right? A sale is going to be like, if I'm using Java programming language, I will most likely create class name sale, and we'll start adding some attributes to it, and also we'll start adding some methods or operations to it, and so forth, right? But there is also sometimes you can think of something like sale amount, right, or total amount, and you can think about it. Oh, look, the sale amount involves computation, involves the taxes involved and everything. You can think about it as an actual object, but at some point it can just become an attribute, right? So sometimes what you originally think of it being an object could actually become just an attribute, a piece of data, which is part of one of the objects. But it's okay. I mean, I can keep adding objects at some point. But essentially, is like, I just want to take a note of it and tell you that some objects could be sometimes almost immediately recognized as just simply data attributes. And data attribute is not, or data attributes, right? So they're not immediately, the data attribute is really not an intelligent object, but simply a piece of data that has to belong to one of the objects that we identify in the system. Another interesting note, I am not saying class, right? Of course, we know in software, in order for us to create an instance of an object, you have to have a software class. But you know what? Users, remember, this is a document, this business requirement document is written by users. They're not programmers. They're not software designers. They don't have like software engineering degrees. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And so, therefore, when you communicate with expert users, it's much easier to use this vocabulary, to use this language when you say sale is an object which we will keep track of in computer memory. Most users are comfortable with this kind of sentence, with this kind of interpretation of their business. But if you say we will have to create a software class named sale, some users will begin to doubt and will essentially begin to feel a bit uncertain about the term class and what it really is and what you're trying to really tell them. So essentially at this level, we want to just basically abstract away from an idea that once you have a software class, you can create 10,000s of objects of that class. We want to essentially focus on one specific type of object and basically keep track of these objects that will be helpful in this system, right? So here, see how it says sales, $ is here. So I'm not sure yet, but whether, you know, but obviously anything that says the $, of course, will be part of the data attribute. It says, keep track of the amount of sales at each register. Now, the cash register is actually a physical device, right? I mean, it's basically like a computer or computer terminal with a cash drawer with the lock that is basically can be unlocked by the store manager or whoever is designated to do that, and it has the log in, log off cycles and things like that. So it's a complicated thing. It has behaviors. It has states. it can do things. So therefore, without much hesitation, I would like to add this to the list